28 Years Later is the latest collaboration between writer Alex Garland and director Danny Boyle, serving as a sequel to the incredible horror cult classic 28 Days Later, and of course its cheesy cash grab sequel which has aged like a glass of milk left out in the sun for about 28 weeks. Despite being a huge fan of the original film, the announcement of a 20-year removed sequel from the same team initially left me apprehensive for more than a few reasons. It's become difficult to separate any sequel announcement from the Hollywood landscape we find ourselves in, and not to cynically view a project of this nature as being motivated by anything more than purely financial incentives. As well as being the first horror film he's directed since 28 Days Later, Boyle's recent track record has not exactly been of the same quality or consistency as his earlier work.
Now I long for yesterday.
What the hell was that?
Yesterday.
That was one of the most beautiful songs I've ever heard.
Yeah.
Against the odds, when the studio released the first trailer, I, like most people, was simultaneously surprised and intoxicated by its presentation. Sure, this was just a trailer, and it was difficult to tell how closely this would resemble the final edit, but the striking look of this film was immediately apparent, and it began to feel like there was a real vision here. It was initially a controversial point of discussion for fans online, but my curiosity was only further piqued by the confirmation from Boyle and director of photography Anthony Dodd Mantle that the film was almost entirely shot on iPhones, as a conscious way to evoke a look that would both honour and evolve the world they created. I think some of the people with negative thoughts about this choice either forgot that the first film was shot on standard definition TV cameras, or maybe just failed to see the value in building upon these initial restrictions rather than simply replicating them. Filmmakers like Sean Baker and Steven Soderbergh have proven not only how creative you can be with these types of cameras, but how the look they create can serve a specific aesthetic for film, even on the radically greater scale in which 28 Years Later operates. Seeing the way it looked and reading about the process that led the director and cinematographer to make this choice, iPhones really did seem like the perfect fit.
The rigs made it harder as well because they saw pretty much 360, so it made it even harder for us to hide absolutely anything. Even though we had VFX help, there were times where we hoped that we could get away with a little bit, put some rigs somewhere, but it made it incredibly difficult.
The film opens with some inexplicably ominous music from the classic British children's show Teletubbies. We then see a group of visibly terrified children with eyes glued to the screen, while they try to block out the sounds of their families being massacred in the background, as if this show hadn't already traumatised enough children in the UK.
I'm the bear, and I'm coming!
It became darkly comical in a way that reminded me that this was the same guy that had a dead baby climbing along the ceiling and twisting its neck 180 degrees in Trainspotting. Even for those that would never be capable of seeing humour in content like this, the sequence really works as a way to re-establish the tone of this universe and to continue the franchise's tradition of these cold open introductions. Nevertheless, the humour is clearly intentional, and as the film continues, particularly in its second half, its warped sense of humour becomes undeniable. There's a Swedish character in the film whose main purpose seems to be specifically comedic relief, but easily the most shocking comedy moment in the film, which is something that will probably only even click for British audiences, was the reveal of a Power Rangers inspired, Clockwork Orange-esque band of infected slaying Jimmy Saviles. Taking its placement within the film, and given that this promises to be a central component of the sequel, this is quite possibly the boldest gag I've ever seen in a film made for $75 million.
There were these characters that appeared at the end of the film called the Jimmies, and it is shocking. It returns you to the fact that this is a horror film, but not in the way you might be expecting. They go on to dominate the second film. I thought this is the most original piece of writing I've seen since Clockwork Orange. That's what I thought. That's honestly what I thought.
Even though this entire scene doesn't really fit in the context of the whole film, I thought it was absolutely hilarious, and I genuinely can't wait to see where this part of the story goes. For at least the first half of the film, I was completely entranced by Boyle's direction. I was reminded of what had made him such a unique and compelling filmmaker for so long. The decision to edit the entire sequence after they leave the settlement and go to the mainland to the Rudyard Kipling poem Boots was yet another bold choice. They were able to build a genuine sense of terror that somehow only helped to immerse me further into the perspective of these characters and the terrifying unknown of this world. To describe the editing as jarring would be an understatement. There are so many cuts and sudden overt changes in lighting, colour and sound, yet the film deftly treads the line between chaos and design, and instilled a sense of genuine dread inside me that I haven't felt watching a horror film in a very long time. The way they built upon this tension throughout the gradual reveal of disgusting, bloated infected that crawl along the forest floor felt almost exactly like nightmares I used to have as a child. The contrast of Aaron Taylor-Johnson's character's amusement with the slow infected and with Spike's fear was both an effective way to justify why a father would be confident enough to bring his 12-year-old son out here into this environment, but only further added to the disturbing nature of the situation and the scale of the underlying threat. The crawling infected were probably the most haunting reveal to me, and I can't lay enough praise on the way these types of sequences were edited, conjuring up a nightmarish palette of disgust and anxiety. I would argue similarly for the terror of the faster infected being some of the most suitably adrenaline-pumping moments of the film, combining action and horror with a proficiency that has rarely affected me on screen before in this way. One thing that I think this film might do better than any zombie movie of this scale is to portray a kind of infection that feels uncannily grotesque, in a way that I was able to process as conceivable. The evolution and mutation of the infected, from the way that they look to the way they behave, it felt like they managed to put the feelings typically evoked by zombies on steroids. And within the consistently horrifying but dreamlike direction, this world quickly became both unrelentingly oppressive and deeply fascinating, in a way that few post-apocalyptic worlds are able to achieve. I couldn't help but be reminded of The Last of Us Season 2, and the way that show attempted to depict the evolution of the fungus, and despite going further into depth and putting way more effort into the scientific explanations around their evolution, the viral mutation and behavioural development of the infection in 28 years later feels so much closer to something that my human brain can relate to, and it's all the more disturbing and thrilling of an experience for it. The reason I'm repeatedly distinguishing between the first and second half of this film is because of my conflicting feelings on the two halves. 28 years later is structured in a way that the first act is its longest, and sometimes feels like it had far more care and attention to detail put into it than anything that follows. Up to the point that Spike leaves the island with his mother, I was so engaged by this film that I wasn't even thinking about the pacing or where everything might go. Unfortunately, from that moment on, the film shifted into a more conventional narrative, revealing its own fundamental structural flaws, and ultimately failing to have enough time to give the climax the emotional weight it deserves. As much as I do kind of enjoy him, the Swedish soldier is easily the weakest element of the film, and even though this overtly comedic character is not an entirely unwelcome departure from the bleak and unrelenting world this appeared to be, I can't help but feeling like something was lost the moment that he appeared, and then later when he pulled out an iPhone. Some people have taken issue with what's been described as the film's uneven tone, particularly with the way that 28 years later ultimately concludes. I think criticism in this area is more than understandable, and I felt that these tones meshed together almost perfectly until around the midpoint, even if I continued to enjoy this film's attempts at comedy right until the ending itself. If you've seen Trainspotting or even the original 28 Days Later, this kind of humour suits Boyle to a T, and again it's the first time in years that I've been reminded of the irreverent charm he used to have. It's hard to argue that these two don't work well together. None of these characters have a hook as interesting as waking up from a coma 28 days after the outbreak, but I felt they were uniquely enhanced by the success of the island setting they established. Not unlike the portrayal of the horrifying evolution of the infected, I was also sold on this settlement far more than something like Jackson from The Last of Us Season 2, and this really highlights the importance of having a singular director's vision at the helm to sell us not only on this world but the believability of the people in it. In a fashion not dissimilar to the original, this sequel evolves from a post-apocalyptic action horror genre film to a deeper and yes, more sentimental examination of our relationship with the people we love and with the inevitability of death.
Do you know the words memento mori?
It means remember death. Remember you must die.
I think a lot of people agree that Jodie Comer was the standout performance of the film, and even though her journey ultimately feels very familiar for the genre, her ability to carry the weight of this film's most impactful emotional moments, sometimes just with her silent expressions, is almost enough to make you forget that you've seen these moments before. Aaron Taylor-Johnson was similarly excellent, and the kid playing Spike was so great he almost made up for the fact a child performance ruins the original film.
Come on, you eat these. Eat these. Are you trying to kill me?
Though Ralph Fiennes also gave an outstanding performance, and the sentiment of the film's climax felt emotionally powerful, I can't help but wish the time we got to spend with Spike and his mother was consistently as poignant, without the distraction of a campy one-note Swede. It's difficult though because I understand that they have another 2 films coming, and judging by the ending, the next film is likely to lean much more heavily into dark comedy, but I think there's an argument to be made that the film would have been even better if they'd continued to build upon that oppressive atmosphere, right up to the point that they meet Ralph Fiennes. I think this would have also completely solved the film's pacing issues in my opinion. Even being one of what I now understand to be many people who much preferred the first half of this film to the second, I never stopped enjoying 28 Years Later, and even appreciated many of the quirkier, less serious tonal changes, including the conclusion itself. This feels like an extremely British, extremely Danny Boyle film. For the first time in a while, I feel very excited to see whatever the director does next, on whatever scale that may be. I would give this film an 8 out of 10.